My name is Edward Thomson. I am a program manager at Microsoft. I work on Visual Studio Team Services. If you don't know what Team Services is, it is our development tools platform. We've got integrated version control, bug tracking, continuous integration, continuous delivery, all of that good stuff. I work on the version control side of that, so I work on Git mostly, so I write about Git and I talk about Git, but today I'm actually going to talk more generally about open source and how you can bring open source into your organization. The thing is, I don't actually know that much about your organization, so I'm actually going to talk about how we adopted open source in our organization. And of course, by that I mean Microsoft. And Microsoft, as of late, has become a really good open source citizen. Here's Satya Nadella, he's our CEO, standing in front of a sign that says that Microsoft loves Linux. And if you can think back to prior Microsoft CEOs, it's kind of hard to imagine anybody standing in front of anything that said anything positive about Linux at all. We were also named by GitHub as the organization with the most open source contributors. And we're really proud of that, but to be quite honest with you, it wasn't always like this at Microsoft. If you think back a little bit, so I came to Microsoft in 2009. I came in through an acquisition. I used to work at a little company called TeamPrise. We were, I think, 4 engineers when Microsoft acquired us. We worked in a cornfield in central Illinois. That's where our headquarters was. And we worked on version control tools for cross-platform. We had a Mac client and a Linux client and a Windows client and then a bunch of like crazy esoteric Unix systems that are kind of exotic these days. HPUX, AIX, Solaris. At one point we had an IBM S390 mainframe client. So if you are 4 engineers and you're building on all of these platforms, you have to use off-the-shelf components. And for us, of course, that meant open source. We used a ton of open source components in TeamPrise. And if you've ever had your company acquired, the first thing that Microsoft did when they came to look at acquiring us was they looked at our books. They did due diligence on our financials. They made sure that we weren't hemorrhaging money and had been lying to them about it this whole time. The second thing that they do is they look at our source code. They wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a bunch of garbage kind of barely held together with duct tape and baling wire. And after that, they looked at our source code for copyrights. They wanted to make sure that we wrote all of the code that we were selling. And of course, we didn't. We didn't write all of it at all. We used a ton of open source. And Microsoft was really kind of surprised to find out how much was in there. They especially were disappointed to see the GPL, which they thought was a little bit evil. And I'm not like really exaggerating here. Like Bill Gates is on record, the former CEO of Microsoft is saying that there's this thing called the GPL, which we disagree with. He says that he dislikes open source software because, quote, the license says that nobody can improve it ever. And his successor, Steve Ballmer, wasn't much kinder. He said that Linux is a cancer. A cancer. So it's really hard to imagine how Microsoft became the organization in GitHub with the most contributors to open source projects from this. So how did we get here? Well, just to look at one little slice of the Microsoft universe that is the project that I work on, Visual Studio Team Services. So the first thing that we did was we identified a need in our business. We found a need in our business that only an open source project could solve. And at first, we actually didn't even know we had that need. So if we look back again, at this time of the year, 2012, we'll look at Team Foundation Server. Team Foundation Server is what we called Visual Studio Team Services back in the old days. It's the on-premises version. But if we look at that, every year the industry analyst Gartner does a report. They look at all the developer tools and they rank them. They throw them on this graph. And I won't belabor what everything means. But up at the top is good, and over at the right is also good. And Microsoft in 2012 was the topmost and the rightmost. So we were great. We were killing it, right? Here's the thing about surveys, though. You can do really well on a survey, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because you know what else does well on a survey? New Coke. Also, most of the political leaders around the world, right? So doing well on a survey doesn't really mean that much. So if we unpack this a little bit, if we dive down and look at what was in Team Foundation Server at the time, I'm not going to bore you too much with the minutia of a version control. But in 2012, we had what was called a checkout, edit, check-in system. And we built this because we wanted to be the enterprise scale version control system. We wanted to handle the Windows code base, the Office code base, really giant stuff. And we wanted it to be relatively easy to use. You know, we were taking on like ClearCase and Rational Jazz in the marketplace, and we thought we had a better tool, right? Here's the thing about this kind of a system, though. You have to manually check out a file, and then you can go edit it. Maybe they're read-only on disk until you do that. So if you're not working with something the size of the Windows code base, it's really, really painful to use. You have all this manual work to do. If you're working on Windows, it's great, because you can't just like have a file system scanner going around a 3 GB code base. Seriously, Windows is 3 gigs. That's all the source code and the build tools, all this other, you know, assorted stuff that goes into assembling the Windows DVD. So if you're working with 3 GB, this system is great. If you're working on a 10-file ASP.NET project, it's terrible, right? It's so painful to use. So in 2012, we kind of listened to our customers, and we came out with an edit, merge, commit type of system. This is the type of system where you can edit a file, and the version control system sees it when you run status, right? It looks around on disk to see what's changed. Okay? An example of this is Subversion. So by 2012, we had basically reinvented Subversion. So needless to say, we weren't really nailing it, right? Subversion was already showing its age at the time. And our customers were not shy about letting us know. This is just some quotes from the internet. Apologies for the profanities. There were a lot more that I edited out. The one at the bottom is particularly painful to me because Brandon Bloom worked at Microsoft when he wrote this. So people would take it to calling us Team Frustration Server. And this is just, you know, random people on the internet, but even internally, we were starting to see a little bit of pain. So again, I came in through an acquisition, and so the team I worked with, we were actually spread out all over the world. We've been headquartered in a cornfield in Illinois. We had somebody working in Illinois, somebody in North Carolina, somebody in Northern Ireland. And our version control server was, you know, I work at Microsoft. Of course, it was in Redmond, Washington. And one day, one of our networks was a little flaky. And somebody asked, hey, why aren't we using a distributed version control system? We're a distributed team. Why do we have a central server? And we really laughed at that one, to be honest with you. Because at Microsoft, if you're building Team Foundation Server, you use Team Foundation Server. But this idea actually took hold a little bit. And we said, why aren't we writing a distributed version control system? We just, you know, added a new mode of working within TFS so that it works kind of like Subversion. Why don't we add a distributed version control system as well? We started talking to our customers, and they said, yeah, you know what, that's a great idea. We'd really love it if you put Git into TFS. And we said, whoa, hey, slow down. I said distributed version control. You know, I don't want to put Git into TFS. I want to put distributed version control into TFS. And they reminded us that they didn't really like our product to begin with. So maybe we should actually think about not doing our own distributed version control system. So eventually they convinced us that they would simply not use our product if we built our own distributed version control. We had to use Git. They were already using Git for their open source projects. They were already publishing with Git. You know, they were using Git push into a Heroku or an Azure space just to publish their apps. Right? Git was already owning the distributed version control market, and nobody was going to tolerate, frankly, some Microsoft knockoff. So it became very clear to us that we absolutely had to support Git. That was step one for us. We identified our business need. We had to support Git. Nothing else would do. So I want to caution you if you start thinking, well, that's great. I want to do open source in my organization. I'm going to identify a business need. This really needs to be a true need that is unique to your business. If you walk in and start just like quoting some truisms about open source, oh, open source is more secure, there's a lower total cost of ownership. These things may be true, but they're not really compelling. If I walk into my manager's office and say, hey, open source is more secure, he's going to say, dude, we write bingo card creator software. It's fine, all right? We don't need, all the eyes that open source gives for review. So really, find a problem that your business actually has that is unique to your business and that only open source can solve. Find that project that solves that need. Okay? Once you've done that, there's a little more homework you have to do. You need to understand the competitive advantage that you have in the marketplace. Because open source, if I'm being completely honest with you, there are some trade-offs. Sometimes you need to let a little bit of intellectual property go. And so you need to make sure that that intellectual property that you're sharing with the community is not the competitive advantage that drives your business. So if we look again at what we were doing with Git, just a little background. So GitHub, the way they host Git repositories, they just have a big fleet of Linux servers with giant hard drives, and they stick the Git repositories directly on the hard drive. It looks a lot like the way, when you do a Git clone. It looks a lot like that, except there's no working directory. So it's just, files on disk. And that makes a lot of sense for their infrastructure and for their architecture. That makes no sense at Microsoft. Visual Studio Team Services, as you might expect, is built on top of Azure. So we wanted something that could store repositories in Azure Blob Storage and in SQL. If we just threw repositories on disk, we couldn't scale it, we couldn't back it up, we just couldn't deal with it efficiently. We were not built to handle that sort of a configuration. So we looked for a project called libgit2. libgit2 is a re-implementation of Git, so it doesn't just look on the hard drive. You can have an abstract sort of back end, and you can point your Git repositories into Azure Blob Storage and into SQL Azure. So this was great for us. All we had to do was write some code to go find the repositories, no problem. Great. The problem with libgit2 was when we looked at it, there was no way to merge two branches. So if we wanted to build pull requests into Visual Studio Team Services, and of course we did, then we'd have to go write this code ourselves. We'd have to go build our own merge engine. And when we started looking at that, we realized that ours was actually going to be a lot faster than the one that's built into Git. Because the one built into Git works on working directories, so it does a lot of disk I/O. It's totally unnecessary for our sort of situation when you're just merging pull requests. We built something that was just in memory, and it was very tight, very fast, and in fact, was perfect for us. The problem is that libgit2, although we loved it, was under the GPL license. So if we built a merge engine into it, we would have to give that back to the community. We would have to publish our changes. That meant that our competitors, who also used libgit2, could use our fancy new merge engine. And in fact, they have since done that. Right? GitHub did that. They published a nice blog post about it, and it's about 4 times faster now. So they're saving money using our merge implementation. They're saving CPU time, and that adds up to cooling costs, to the number of servers they have to have, right? By using this merge engine that we wrote, we're saving our competitors, GitHub, money. So it's real easy to think that our competitive advantage is the fact that we have a bunch of people who've been building version control software for years. At Microsoft, we've got people who were building distributed version control long before they came to Microsoft and worked on Git. So we know that we have all these great people with great talent, and is that our advantage? Is this merge engine our advantage? And it's not. It's easy to start thinking that it might be. Like, we're putting a lot of time into building this and testing it. It's our intellectual property, right? But what it's not is actually our competitive advantage. So we were able to publish this back because, frankly, Git repository hosting at this point in time is a commodity. Nobody's moving from GitHub to Visual Studio Team Services because they can merge their pull requests 4 times faster, right? It's just not actually something that gets done. So that's not our competitive advantage. But that wasn't obvious to us at first. We were really worried about giving up this IP to our competitors. It turns out that our competitive advantage is our ability to scale. GitHub scales beautifully as well. They're the world's largest Git hosting provider. But Microsoft scales to be able to host the world's largest Git repositories. And that's our competitive advantage. And once we realized that, we were fine with adopting libgit2, the GPL, and even giving our competitors the ability to use our intellectual property. So be sure you know what it is that you value in your company and what it is that your competitive advantage is. And don't give that up, but share the other things, okay? Once you've done your homework, you've figured out the need that you have that only an open source technology can solve, and the things that are important to you and your competitive advantage, it's time to start convincing people that open source is a good strategy. You should start with the people closest to you, your coworkers. Hopefully you've got trust with them and they like you and they understand the world from the same perspective that you do. If not, you may have other organizational problems that open source won't solve. So at Microsoft, my buddy Martin came to me and he said, hey, I think we should put Git into Visual Studio and Visual Studio Team Services. And I laughed at him, to be honest with you. He was talking about putting a GPL piece of technology that was written by Linus Torvalds, the guy who wrote that cancerous Linux, into our products. And I thought that that would never fly. But he convinced me. He showed me the business need, and he showed me our competitive advantage, and he convinced me. And that's all it takes. You got to start small. Convince one person at a time at first. And then you'll build a core group. And ideally, you'll find somebody rather persuasive. My buddy Martin is incredibly persuasive. He's this charming British guy, and everybody laughs at his jokes when he says things like, oh, we'll just do a wee bit of work, and everybody laughs, and it's great. It's very charming. I am not British, and so I'm also not charming. So if you have that problem, I've got a bit of a bold suggestion. You look outside of your team a little bit and go to your sales team. I know that technologists and salespeople don't always get along. They tend to overpromise and then come back to you with crazy deadlines that they've just sold the customer on. But there's 2 important things that they do that are really useful to you if you need to convince some management that maybe open source is a good idea. The first thing that they do is they talk to customers all the time. That's literally their job, is to talk to customers and prospective customers. So they can really quickly validate if your business need actually is a business need. If I said to them, hey, I want to put Git into Visual Studio Team Services, and they come back to me and say, that's great, we are losing deals, we are hemorrhaging deals because we don't have Git in Visual Studio Team Services, then that's an absolutely great validation of our business need. The problem with that is that they're salespeople, so they've probably already promised it to the customer, and I've got like 6 months to deliver it. The other useful thing that they do is that they're very convincing. That it's their job to go to people and persuade them to open up their pocketbooks, take a hunk of money out, and hand it to them, right? These are people you want on your side. Because oftentimes, when you go into a meeting with your management, and you start talking about how great open source is and how it's going to solve all your problems, they know you. I'm an open source zealot. I really am. I think open source is great. I think we should do open source by default. And when I go into a meeting and start talking to my manager about how we should do open source, he knows. He sees the stars in my eyes. he knows I just want to open source everything. So he doesn't believe me when I say that we have a real business need and that only open source can solve it. He thinks I just want to, GPL Windows and be done with it, okay? Your sales team isn't like that. Your sales team is motivated by one thing. It's not whether the GPL is great. It's not whether we should MIT license something instead. It's money. They want to hit their quota. So if you can trot them into a meeting and they say, yeah, we really need to put Git into Visual Studio Team Services, nobody doubts that it's about anything but the money. So once you've got your coworkers on board, it's time to go to your managers, your immediate managers, the people that run your product. And your managers are tough, to be completely honest with you, because they've been building this product for a long time. They've talked to a lot of customers. Customers have told them what they want out of the product, and they've been building it for years. And so if something outside the box comes, your managers can push back a little bit. Let me give you a concrete example. When we started talking about putting Git in VSTS, our managers looked at Git and were like, what? This is nothing like the sort of enterprise level version control system that we've been building. Our customers, like our defense contractors, they want like crazy fine-grained permissions on files. They want to be able to say that only 3 people in the company can read this file, only 1 can write it, right? Git isn't like that. Git has permissions at the repository level. If you can read the repository, you can read the repository, and then you can check in locally, right? You're missing the sort of fine-grained permissions and auditing and all these like super customized functionalities that Team Foundation version control, its centralized system, has. Customers have been demanding this, like they've got OSHA requirements, or not OSHA, but the medical requirements, or they've got requirements from Wall Street that they think that they need to hit. And they think that they need like these crazy fine-grained permissions to do it. And Git just doesn't have those, right? So they were immediately dubious of the idea that enterprise customers would want Git. If you run into that situation, this is an excellent book, The Innovator's Dilemma. It breaks down technologies into 2 types. Sustaining technologies, which Team Foundation version control was, the centralized version control system was. We were incrementally improving it. And disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies, like Git, at first look like they don't come anywhere close to fitting the needs that you were delivering before. What you find is that people adapt, because there are so many benefits to the disruptive technology. In this case, Git, easier branching, lightweight merging, the ability to have a whole new workflow with pull requests, that people will figure out ways around the problems that they thought they had at first, right? Are fine-grained permissions, is auditing really a problem for these companies? Are they willing to give them up for Git? Some of them were. Right? But if you narrowly think about the product that you're already building and already delivering as what people want, then you'll miss these disruptive technologies. So this is an excellent book to guide your management into understanding what the disruptive technologies look like. Okay? I'm sorry to say it, but the next group of people that you need to talk to are your lawyers. We were bummed about this when we started thinking about this at Microsoft, because it was the lawyers who, when we were getting acquired, told us that we couldn't use certain open source projects because they had licenses that they didn't like. We actually, when we got acquired, we had 3 products on the market. After we got acquired, it was down to 2. We had to kill a whole product because the lawyers found so many of the projects that we'd used objectionable, and we just couldn't, quote unquote, this is the term we used, remediate those projects. We couldn't rewrite them. We couldn't find a way to solve it. We just had to kill the product entirely. It was a real bummer for us. So we were going into the meeting with the lawyers already trying to figure out how to go over their heads, If we go to the senior vice president, he can ignore what they say. That's not a good idea. But that was the mindset that we were in. And so we sat down with our lawyers, and we started outlining for them that we wanted to use Git. Git is under the GPL license, which, Bill Gates doesn't believe in. And it was written by Linus Torvalds, the guy who wrote Linux, which is a cancer. And so we were totally ready to have our lawyers shoot us down. Right? And our lawyer sits through this and he listens to us patiently, and as we probably had a PowerPoint deck about, how great we were going to be, and with, somebody throwing dollar bills around. Eventually our lawyer looked at us and he said, well, you've given me a lot to think about. I can't tell you for sure anything today, but I'm going to keep an open mind. But I got to say, I think this is a great idea, because I'm tired of using the command line to push when I hack on my open source projects at night. I'd much rather do this within Visual Studio. And we were like, what? Turns out our lawyer is a technology lawyer. And like most technology lawyers, he actually knows something about technology. So he was a software engineer before he became a lawyer, and now he hacks on open source projects for fun at night. So don't be so afraid of your lawyers. They'll surprise you. There's a reason they become technology lawyers, and that's because they actually like technology. So you might think that's everybody, but there's usually one person who can actually give you a firm yes or no answer on whether you can do something. Somebody in your senior leadership. The person that through all decisions go. The person that will fire your ass if you do something really stupid, right? For us at the time, that was Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer, who says that open source shows the characteristics of communism. Ugh. I wasn't in this meeting. I really, really wish I was, but I wasn't in this meeting. I would like to think it went something like this. We told Steve that developers want Git in Visual Studio. They want Git in Visual Studio Team Services. The developers are demanding this. And then Steve Ballmer said, developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers. So, yes! So there, you can say a lot of things about Steve Ballmer. He's a little bit uptight, wound up. He's a lot sweaty. But one thing you can say is that he actually means this. He truly believes that for Microsoft to succeed, it has to be the platform that developers want to build for, right? He actually does love developers. I mean, this is honest. This is honest Steve Ballmer right here. And so he gave us the green light. We weren't done yet. This was just the beginning. This gave us the ability to go build the product that we wanted to build, putting Git into VS and VSTS. And while we were doing that building, it's really important that you keep it legal, right? That conversation we had with our lawyer was just the first. So you've got to do a couple of things now. You need to educate your team. You need them to know that there are different types of open source licenses. They don't need to know, chapter and verse, the differences between the GPL-v2 and the GPL-v3, or how that compares to the MIT. I don't want my developers to necessarily be able to, quote the BSD advertising clause, right? But they need to know that there are different types of licenses. That just because you got the green light to use one piece of open source technology, that all of a sudden the floodgates haven't opened up and you can just use anything you want. Okay? It's important to educate them that things have different licenses and that these exist. You also need to educate your legal team. You don't need to educate them on, again, the different types of licenses. They should know this, right? Your legal team needs to be able to handle the open source responsibilities on their own, right? And you can find outside counsel that is excellent for this if your internal counsel, if you have internal counsel, doesn't know this stuff. You need to instead educate your legal team about the software that you're using. If you want to start using, say, Git or libgit2, you need to go to your legal team and say, hey guys, this is the technology that I want to use. And then you need to listen to them while they educate you on how you can use that effectively. because they're going to have opinions on this. Their job is to mitigate risk in your company. And that sounds really boring, and I don't know, they seem to like it. But the important part is that you also want to make sure that you're not opening up the company to risk. Let me give you an example. When we started putting Git into Visual Studio, our lawyer said, that's great. Now, you have a responsibility here. The GPL outlines the rights that users have. So if you buy Visual Studio 2013, and you get this great Git repository management, we, Microsoft, needs to give our users the ability to find the source code, recompile the source code, and plug it into Visual Studio. Okay? That's what the license says we have to provide. Our users have the right to this. We cannot take away that right. So how are we going to satisfy this? Our lawyers asked. And we said, we'll point them to GitHub. Duh, it's right there. Right? And our lawyers said, no. That's not how you're going to do this. And we were like, what? Of course that's how we'll do this. Everybody uses GitHub for open source, right? No. So here's the thing. When you buy Visual Studio 2013, you get an ISO, you might get a DVD, right? That can last you 10 years, 15 years. You can go install, if you can find in 15 years a computer that'll run it, you can go install Visual Studio 2013 on a computer, and you still have all the rights that we gave you when we sold that to you. You still have the right to be able to go, swap in a new version of our Git code. You can't take it away just because github.com, the website, doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I hope it's still around in 15 years, but there's no guarantee of that. That's what our lawyer was trying to remind us of. So what we actually had to do was put a zip file with all the source code on it that's totally buildable by you into Visual Studio. So when you install it, we'll actually drop a zip file in the install folder that's got the source code in it. And you can go unzip it, hack on it, rebuild it, swap it into Visual Studio. And people have actually, this isn't theoretical. People do this. It kind of blows my mind, but people do this, and they have the right to do it. And we have the responsibility at Microsoft to make sure that we satisfy those rights. Okay? One other thing you can do is you can automate your compliance scanning. That sounds so buzzwordy, I'm sorry. But so there are companies like WhiteSource that will scan your source code and look at the open source technologies that you're using and tell you what license those fall under. And that sounds like it's just a nice to have thing, right? You can go read the licenses yourself. But WhiteSource will actually do it a little nicer, right? It's got this huge database with all of the open source data in it. And so you might be using an open source technology, and you look and you read it, and it says it's under the MIT license. Great. But what happens sometimes is that people find some source code on the internet, they copy, and they paste it into this project, right? So maybe they found something in a GPL license project, and they copied and pasted it into this MIT license project. What license is that under now? WhiteSource can actually dig in a little bit deeper and tell you these sorts of things. Well, the project purports to be under the MIT license, but they haven't been really good about actually figuring out where their contributions came from. And so it comes back to legal risk. So you need to be able to make educated choices about this, and compliance scanning tools can help you. So if this all sounds really scary, I'm sorry. Don't be afraid of open source. As a contributor, as a maintainer of open source, what I want to do is I want you to use the projects that I work on. I work on this at night and on weekends and on my vacation time, and I assure you my wife reminds me that I spend all this time on it. But I do that because I want you to use it. There's no trick here like, oh, I want to trap you with some license. And the lawyers don't either. There aren't like multi-millionaire lawyers who are suing people because of GPL enforcement issues. On the contrary, the open source lawyers want people to use open source technology to understand the licenses and to comply with them. These guys, I'm sure they'll tell you, they're here. They're not millionaires. These guys run on donations. There's a booth downstairs for the Software Freedom Conservancy. These are the lawyers who are helping make sure that free and open source software stays free and open source, and they will appreciate you becoming a member. I joined up at OSCON, so my membership is up again today. So I'm going to go re-up downstairs later. When you do this right, your lawyers like you. Your lawyers are happy. This is actually a fun challenge for them because technology lawyers are technologists and they get a kick out of this stuff. This is actually the developer tools legal team at Microsoft wearing GitHub t-shirts and enjoying it. So once you've started using open source, make sure you keep it legal. Okay? The last thing to do while you're building your technology with open source is to embrace the community. Embrace the open source community. And I can sum that up with 2 words. Don't fork. And I don't mean the GitHub sort of retcon definition of fork where you create a new repository and that's the workflow for sending pull requests through. I mean, don't create a separate project from the upstream that you maintain independently. Contribute your changes back to the upstream project. This isn't just being a good open source citizen, although there is that. This is also making sure that your workflow is sane. If you find a bug in an open source project that only you have encountered before, you can write a quick patch and great, now you've got your own version. Maybe you don't contribute that back upstream, right? It's only you that found it. You're not really helping anybody, right? You're going to have more and more of those patches as you find features that you need. Maybe the open source project doesn't support a file format that you need to support. So eventually you just end up with this big stack of patches that you just keep applying to the upstream project whenever a new version comes out. And that's really painful. I can tell you this from experience. I've done this. This is a terrible workflow because you dread every time a new version comes out. And one day they're going to refactor everything. And your stuff is just going to break. Your patches just won't apply cleanly anymore because they don't even know you exist because you haven't been working with them. My buddy Ben says that branching is an integration credit card, right? And he's talking about the need to use short-lived topic branches as a workflow. That's kind of a best practice that we understand these days. Forking is like this on steroids, right? Your ability to integrate your changes just diminishes over time. So don't fork. You'll probably find yourself instead getting caught in what we call the contribution funnel. You start out using an open source technology and then you start filing bug reports, you contribute your time. And then you start fixing those bugs yourself, you start contributing code. And if you're not careful, it is a slippery slope. You can end up maintaining an open source project. Okay? So while you're building this, embrace the community. Okay? And that's it. After that, success. We put Git into Visual Studio, we put Git into Visual Studio Team Services, and people were happy. This was kind of the tip of the iceberg for us. It wasn't just us, there were a lot of groups within Microsoft who were getting into open source, and eventually, there was critical mass, and we started open sourcing crazy amounts of our own technology. The .NET framework, the Roslyn compiler, we open sourced this stuff. We built a foundation around it to support our ability to open source projects, and we even brought in outside projects. And of course, we became the organization in GitHub that had the most number of contributors to open source. That's them. These are actually all the Microsoft employees who have GitHub, who are using GitHub and have Microsoft as their public profile. And there are more at this than this that don't. So great job. You might find that once you've adopted open source, you've used open source, you've started contributing to open source, you might find that you actually like the open source workflows. They might look different than the ones that you have been using in your company. They certainly were for us and ours. And so there's kind of an optional, level up, step 7. You can embrace inner source. You can take the open source lessons that you've learned and apply them internally inside your firewall. If you looked at Microsoft back in 2012, we called it a bunch of silos. Every business unit was separate. Windows, Visual Studio, Office, they didn't talk to each other, right? If I'm on the Visual Studio team, I use Windows every day, but I can't look at the source code. And Windows uses Visual Studio to build itself, and they can't look at the source code for it. So you get into this weird sort of, I don't know, somebody else summed it up a lot better than I can. And they suggested that, maybe there's some antagonism between the various business units within Microsoft. And we said, what if we can break that down? What if we can break down the silos? What does that look like? And so we did that. At Microsoft now, all the source code within the company is public. As a Visual Studio team member, I can go look at the Windows source code. It's all just hosted in Git, and everybody accepts pull requests. So this is, and this isn't like something that we just did to say, hey, look at us, we did it. This is actually useful. The Office team, of course, builds a product for Windows and a product for Mac. They also build products for the phone in your pocket, for Android and iOS. And as they were moving to Visual Studio and Visual Studio Team Services for their build process, they looked at it and they realized that they had some requirements that we didn't meet. They needed to be able to code sign their Android and iOS builds to go into those app stores. And we didn't support that. And they talked to us and we said, actually, that's not really on our radar. So instead, they just cloned it, just like it was an open source project. They added the functionality themselves. They opened a pull request. We gave them some comments. And ultimately, we merged it. So now they've got the ability to do code signing within Visual Studio Team Services. And so does everybody else, right? This was a win for the community. So optional, step 7, embrace inner source. Embrace the open source mindset within your firewall. So it's actually not so bad to adopt open source within your organization. Do a little homework, convince a few people, keep it legal, and embrace the community. Okay? Thanks so much for your time, everybody. Again, my name is Ed Thomson. I do not have time for questions, but I will be hanging out at the Microsoft booth downstairs in the exhibit hall. And feel free to ask me. If you can't find me there, hit me up on Twitter. I'm eThomson, Thomson without a P, E-T-H-O-M-S-O-N. So thanks again.